Welcome to the Profile Series. My name is Terry Duenas, and we're actually in for an exciting half hour that you will be interested in. I guarantee it. We're here today with Greg White. He is from the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, which I just discovered as we were sitting talking is a massive, massive organization. And Greg is the Deputy Chief?
Well, Chief of Staff.
Chief of Staff.
And General Counsel.
And General Counsel. I knew I'd blow your title.
That's okay. It wouldn't be the first.
It is going to be wonderful, but we have so many things to talk about because I didn't realize one of the key things that we're gonna chat about today is cybersecurity and identity theft and the scams that are involved with it. But before we start that, Greg, can you give us a little bit of an overview on what the Office of Consumer Affairs does?
Yes, typically, Terry, when people hear about consumer affairs, they automatically think of the Attorney General's office.
Absolutely.
Which is, important part of what they do. Maura Healey, the Attorney General, that was her focus when she was a prosecutor in that office. But we're a separate entity. We're separate and apart. We're the regulator. The Attorney General's office, who we work very closely with, does our enforcement work. When you talk about the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, the Undersecretary likes to say that we regulate Main Street America. Right. Undersecretary Chapman will say, you can't go down Main Street America without touching one of the industries or entities that we regulate. So state-chartered banks and credit unions, insurance company, mortgage loan, gas stations, barbershop, cosmetologists. These are all entities that we regulate. About at least a $500 million industry. So towards that end, there are 5 agencies that report up to the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, and we report up to the Housing and Economic Development. Towards that end, the 5 agencies that we oversee are the Division of Banks. The Division of Banks are all about safety and soundness. So they have 2 focuses. One is on state-chartered banks and credit unions. And they oversee regulate about a $400 billion industry. And there are just under 200 state-chartered banks and credit unions in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Then you got what they call the non-depository side, and there are about 9,200 of those entities, if you will. So check cashing business, mortgage loans, all fall under the non-depository side of banks. In addition to that, we oversee the Division of Insurance, which regulates a $50 billion industry. So healthcare, homeowners, auto insurance, all fall under them. There are about 1,600 insurance companies that do business in Massachusetts. There are about 100,000 what they call producers, those individuals who are writing policies. And in addition to that, they oversee the Surcharge Appeal Board, which you may be familiar with. So if you're involved in an accident and you're deemed more than 50% at fault, your insurance company can levy a surcharge on you. You have a right as a consumer to appeal to the Surcharge Appeal Board. It's the only one in the United States.
Great.
All 49 other states, you basically work it out with your insurance company, which is a bit of a conflict. They make the determination and then they decide whether or not you have a valid appeal. Last year, we had about 30,000 appeals. 2/3 of them were vacated. And so it's an important part of the Division of Insurance.
Well, it sounds like everything that every agency that you've covered right now, it's protection for the consumer.
Yes.
It's protection for the little guy who really, we know nothing.
Yes.
We don't know about the insurance
absolutely.
business or the banking business.
Yeah, absolutely, Terry. And all our agencies have a consumer unit where if you're having troubles, they're looking to foreclose on your mortgage. We have individuals with the Division of Banks who can assist you with that. If you're having problems with your health insurance and how questions that need to be answered, we have staff on that will respond to your inquiries. So we're all about enabling and educating consumers and protecting consumers, but we're also about making it easier to do business in Massachusetts. When Governor Baker was campaigning a few years ago, he would talk about how he would go down into southern states, and it would take a fraction of time what it took to be licensed here in Massachusetts. He's tried to cut all the red tape, and towards that end, not to get off subject, but we recently went through and basically reviewed all 2,200 regulations in Massachusetts. It was part of an executive order that the Baker-Polito administration sought at the beginning of the term. And basically, any regulation that wasn't working, we repealed. Anyone that was working, we kept, and anything that needed tweaking, we amended it. And we did it to all of the state regulations. And out of that, we had about 10% our agencies that were involved in the regulation review, if you will.
So it seems like for years it was a complaint of small businesses that there was so much red tape.
Absolutely.
And that they couldn't get through, and it didn't make sense for a small business, and they were always taking a shot.
Absolutely.
And it was the worst situation, but you say this is really turning around.
We've made some significant improvements, one of which is through our Division of Professional Licensure, which basically oversees about 530,000 licensees in Massachusetts, from electricians to plumbers to chiropractors to accountants to veterinarians. Recently, they were part of what they call Article 87. We took over the Department of Public Safety. So now we oversee building inspectors, we oversee amusement parks, we oversee nuclear power plants, amongst other things, boxing commission, Ultimate Fighters. We're responsible for regulating that industry. And as such, as part of the improvements, they implemented what they call e-licensing, which was one of the first of its kind in Massachusetts. It enables all these licensees to either become licensed or renew their license online. It also enables a consumer, if they have a problem with one of these entities, to file a complaint online. And we recently got it off the ground about 18 months ago, and it's been very effective. We've had some problems along the way with IT issues, but we've tweaked it, and we're getting it to where it needs to be. But if you're a chiropractor and you want to renew your license, then you can do it through the system, and it's much more efficient for a small business or small business operate to
I
work.
can see the oversight situation from the small business end. You want to make it quick and efficient and easy for them to renew and maintain their license.
Yes.
But from the consumer side, I'm sitting here as a consumer saying, well, I hope that doesn't mean that there's less oversight on these groups and organizations.
No, and towards that end, the Division of Professional Licensure, basically handled 2,000 complaints last year. And we have hearing officers. There's a complaint process, and at the end of the day, the boards, and there are 39 of them, can fine a licensee, they can suspend their license, or they can revoke their license. So, we're all about balancing between businesses as well as consumers out there.
Now, should we as a consumer be reluctant to call your office? Say we have a problem with an electrical contractor.
Yeah.
We come in and we're not sure that they did the work right or something, and we thought, well, we paid an inordinate amount of money for the job.
Yeah.
Is your office is it those type of complaints?
We handle a variety of complaints.
Okay.
So if you have an issue with one of your contractors, you can reach out to the Division of Professional Licensure. When in doubt, and we'll give you the number you can put up.
Great. We'll put it on the screen.
Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation maintains a an 800 number, and so we take inquiries, and if we can't address that issue, then we will farm it out to one of our respective agencies.
Great.
So we have those 3 agencies, but in addition to that, we have the Division of Standards, which basically regulates weights and measures in Massachusetts. So they license gas stations, fuel pumps, fuel delivery trucks, hawkers and vendors, auto body repair shops, glass repair shops, among other things. And I'll talk a little bit more about their role in dealing with identity theft, which is involved in with skimmers out there, where they're finding them in gas pumps, in ATM machines, in scanners.
We want to hear about that.
Yes, and so they oversee that. And then lastly, they have the Department of Telecommunications and Cable, which regulates the telecommunications and cable industry in Massachusetts. In addition to that, we have our own mandate. So we oversee the do not call list along with the federal government. So if you are receiving an inordinate amount of phone calls, you can be put on the do not call list. We oversee the data breach, which is a huge issue, as you know. It seems every week either a private industry or an agency is having their information breached. Under the 93H, we oversee the data breach. So if you're a entity and you're holding personal information of a Massachusetts resident, that information has been breached, you're required to notify our office along with the Attorney General's office. The nature of the breach, how many Massachusetts residents have in fact been impacted, and what steps you've taken to rectify that. And so we've, unfortunately, it's a matter of time. Someone said to me, I spent 14 years as a prosecutor in Massachusetts. Back when I was a young prosecutor, identity theft consisted of someone losing their wallet and gaining. Now people don't even have to leave their basement, and they're hacking into systems. And it's so, what we tell consumers is that, it's not a question of whether or not your identity or my identity is going to be breached. It's just a matter of when and how many times, and so I can circle back with that about steps consumers can take to protect that. So we oversee the data breach. We oversee the Lemon Law arbitration program. So if you've been aggrieved by purchasing a new or pre-owned vehicle, you can apply through our arbitration program to have your grievance addressed. We just put into effect a custom wheelchair arbitration program that if you've been aggrieved by purchasing a custom wheelchair, you can apply to our arbitration program. The most important program that we oversee that we have put a lot of time and energy into is the home improvement contracting program.
Excellent.
Yeah, and if you're a contractor in Massachusetts and you are performing home improvement contracting work, you're required to register with our office. That requires you to pay a registration fee that you renew every 2 years, and it requires you to pay into what they call the guarantee fund, which is a one-time payment into the guarantee fund depending upon how many employees you have, up to $500, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But what that does is that it provides a consumer with a level of protection because we maintain a database. And if a contractor, and unfortunately there are contractors out there who aren't doing the right thing. The bulk of them in Massachusetts are hard-working, professional individuals who take pride in their work. But like any entity, there are always bad apples. And we take calls from local police departments, from the local DA's office, and our investigators work with them prosecuting these individuals. But towards that end, if you're going to do work on your home, in most work that you have done in your home is going to cost you thousands of dollars. It's not going to be a couple hundred. You may get those exceptions, but for the most part, it's thousands of dollars. So you want to make sure that you're dealing with an individual who's properly registered, is insured, that you have a written contract, and we have a website that lays out the criteria that you, the consumer, should adhere to ensure that your property is being protected. Because at the end of the day, that's probably everyone's biggest asset
No
is your
question.
home, right?
No
And
question.
so, you know, we've gotten calls from consumers. We had one woman in the Natick area who had given a contractor $70,000 to rent, just as a deposit, to renovate her home. Basically, they were leveling the second floor, putting on an in-law apartment. They took the roof off, they took the deposit, and then they took off. And so this happened in November. The woman was without a roof for the entire winter, you know, and so we're working with the local law enforcement to address that issue. So by doing your due diligence, by ensuring that the person's properly registered, that they're insured, that you have a written contract and you follow the criteria, what that does is that it enables you to apply to the guarantee fund should you be aggrieved by that contract. So provided you meet the criteria, and again, we lay that out on our website, and we have people on staff who can answer consumers' questions. If you meet the criteria, you can apply and receive up to $10,000 in restitution from the guarantee fund.
Terrific.
And it's something that a lot of consumers didn't know about a few
Now,
years ago.
is that a new thing?
No, it's been around for
Been around
years,
for a long
but
time?
the program had been neglected to the point that we could not pay out our claims in a reasonable manner. It would require us to wait for almost 2 years because there wasn't enough money in the guarantee fund.
Right.
Now, because of the emphasis on compliance, we've reached a point where we have the funds in the guarantee fund, and generally we pay it out within 30 days of all the paperwork being completed. So that's an important point to note, because at the end of the day, if you contract with the individual and they're not properly registered, it voids your ability to access the guarantee fund.
That's an amazing thing. I mean, just to realize how many places, how many points your office can touch
Yes.
the individual
Yes. Consumers. Yeah.
consumer, who we're all major consumers. But if and you look at something like that, I mean, there's the joke on the Cape is, yeah, the guy will, you can make a deal to have a guy come and do the remodeling on your house, but will he get there?
Right.
You know.
Right.
And so to know that there's somebody in your corner,
Yes.
if there's potential for fraud,
Yeah.
or shoddy work or whatever, you guys are that advocate.
Yes.
I didn't even realize that, and I probably would have never even realized to contact your office.
Right.
Now, we will have a lower third with your
Sure.
phone number
Contact
and your
information,
website
yeah.
to be able to get a hold of you if there is a situation, if there is a complaint. And I want to shift gears
Sure.
into the cybercrime,
Sure.
the situations where folks are actually being conned, and the identity theft
Yes.
is happening.
Yeah.
Because somebody like me, great, but I'm saying, all right, who's going to want to steal my identity?
Yeah.
Because I don't have enough money to make a difference.
Well, you know, it's all about numbers, right? So, you know, taking a little from you in and of itself isn't going to be a big deal for the person who's committing the fraud, but they do it across the board.
Sure.
And one of the biggest issues that we're dealing with in protecting consumers as well as businesses is skimming devices, which have, you know, been around for a few years. They're becoming much more prominent. You're finding these devices in ATM machines. You're finding them in gas pumps. I can provide this to your staff, but and they can put it up at some point.
We'll put these pictures up.
But what they do is they in dead of night, they'll break into the machine and they'll put these devices in, and they become very sophisticated with them. They now have the opportunity to use Bluetooth. So back in the day, they would put these devices in, then they would wait a period of time, obtain the information, then they go back and retrieve the device.
Right.
Now they access it through Bluetooth. They leave the device in there. It's a cost of doing business. And so back to the Division of Standards, which basically licenses fuel pumps, they are going out to gas stations. They will get a call that a machine they have found a skimming device in that machine, and then they will turn around and contact local law enforcement. So what we tell consumers to do is that when they go to pump their own gas, if they do pump their own gas, that there's going to be a sticker on top of the machine.
Okay.
And that was either put by a local sealer or one of the state inspectors. And if that has been breached, we advise the consumer to notify the proprietor. Unfortunately, they're one step ahead of us. So that was what we would advise the consumer. Now they've come up with a counterfeit sticker that they place over
They'll
it.
put it right over it.
Put it right over it. So they breach it, then they put a sticker on top.
So by going to your local gas station,
Yes.
that you go to every week
Yes.
to get your gas,
Yeah.
you're not guaranteed that that machine doesn't have a skimmer
No.
inserted in.
But they've come out with a local app that our inspectors are looking to purchase. You can either download it on, I believe it's an iPhone, or you can get a handheld gun that will pick up a skimming device. So you can use your phone and determine whether or not this machine, in fact, has a skimming device. They've just come out with that. It's something that we're trying to stay ahead of the situation. But what they'll do is they'll take that information and they'll disseminate it. We recently had a cybersecurity conference where we had members of the FBI and the Secret Service. And one of the agents talked about a mom and pop shop up in upper state New York. It was a small little entity in a high tourism area, and they put these skimming devices in some of the machines up there. It was a group out of Eastern Europe. They basically retrieved it by way of Bluetooth. They disseminated to 13 countries worldwide with the caveat that you weren't to release it until you got a certain date and time and then release the information. Within several hours, millions of dollars had been compromised and lost. And that's just one small mom and pop store up in upper state New York. So they can, and again, they're very sophisticated. What they'll do is they will have, many times on the ATM machines, they will have a camera mounted up top. So that's capturing your PIN number as you put it in, and the skimming device within the machine is capturing your personal information. And so we advise consumers that if you go to an ATM machine and you see something isn't right, to notify the bank officials.
Sure.
Recently, there was a correction officer who was attending a concert down in Providence. He noticed that the facade and top of the machine was ajar, so he pulled it, and lo and behold, there was a skimming device behind it.
In the machine.
In the machine. So we don't advise you to do that because there's important forensic evidence in there.
Right.
Notify the bank officials. They'll notify the local law enforcement, who will reach out to some of the federal agencies, and they'll conduct the investigation.
But this, and this is not necessarily to get your single transaction that you're making right there.
No.
It's to get your information, get your ATM number
Yep.
and your PIN.
And your
everything
PIN,
else.
and then they're going to disseminate it. And what they'll do is they'll conduct what they call a hit. They'll use your information, and they'll want to see if it's a live card. So they'll, $1 or $2 or $5. And once they're successful in that, then you'll see $500 is withdrawn, $1,000 is, and they'll do it over a short period of time. They'll clear out the account to the best they can, and then they'll move on. But your information has been compromised. And most folks aren't even aware that that information has been compromised. So there's steps that one can take to protect their information if, in fact, you've been a victim of a breach. First off, cancel your credit card.
Okay.
Notify the local officials. I recently was on a show with a local chief of police, and he said, Greg, we get about a dozen consumers and residents who come in and report that they've been a victim of identity theft. And he said, our hands are somewhat limited because many of these folks are halfway across the world. You know.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you can take steps beyond canceling your credit card. You can put a credit freeze on your credit report. And recently, as we were saying before the show, you know, we're all going to be victims of identity theft. About 18 months ago, I was notified in the same week by my mortgage company that my information had been compromised. 5 days later, I was reading the Boston Globe and realized that over 25 million current and former federal employees had their information breached in one of the largest hacks on a government agency. I had worked in one of the prior presidential administrations. So within 5 days, my information had been compromised on 2 occasions. As a result of that, I reached out to the credit reporting and I put a freeze on it. That's supposed to stay into effect for a short period of time.
Sure.
Well, I went to purchase with my wife some electronic equipment from one of the national chains, and they said, you know what, if you get our credit card, you can get 10% off. And I said, well, no, I want to just pay it off. They said, you can pay it off. Just take the 10%. I said, okay, great. They asked for my information. I gave it to him, and the next thing you know, he hands me the phone. He says, it's been denied. You want to speak to corporate. And I was speaking to a representative from corporate, and they said, did you recently put a freeze on your, and I said, yes, I did. And they said, well, why don't you take it off? And I said, no, we'll use my wife's information. We'll keep that on.
Wow.
And it is effective because you're not going to be able to utilize that information on a larger scale if you are denied by the credit reporting agency. And so that's an effective way of basically freezing the information so that if you are in fact a victim of identity theft, then they can't utilize the information.
What else should we do at home to ensure or to even know when our information has been compromised?
Review your credit report. By law, they're required to give you 1 free credit report a year. Make sure that that information that is being attributed to you is in fact your information.
I never do that.
I know, and a lot of people do. For instance, recently my wife and I were dealing with a home improvement contractor, and we were meeting with a member of their staff, and she learned that I was with the Office of Consumer Affairs, and she said, oh, recently I went to refinance on my home, and I learned that someone had obtained my personal information, had purchased a condominium in my name, in her name, had purchased a new vehicle in her name, and she said, but for the fact that we were refinancing, I wouldn't have had any idea. And it wouldn't be until they defaulted on the payments, and then they're going to come back to you looking for payment on it. So review your credit report annually, at least. If you have been a victim of identity theft, cancel your credit card. I suggest you put a credit freeze on that. And then, in addition to that, there's steps you can take to protect your identity. For instance, using your password. Most people get a password that can easily be attributed to them, and they never change it. You know,
No, that's true.
Social media, right? I can learn more about social media than most people could 30 years of having spent some time with you. All I have to do is go on social media. If you have a Facebook account, I can determine whether or not you have any children or grandchildren. And that leads me to some of the scams that we're dealing with. One of the scams that is out there is the grandparent or the grandmother scam. Have you heard of that?
No, but I definitely want to hear it. I just want to tell the ladies in the booth that we may go over, ladies, because I think this information is so important.
Sure.
I want you to go.
Yeah, sure.
Because we're coming up to our time.
Sure,
But
yeah.
we're going to extend it on.
Okay.
Because I think it really makes it so important. And we don't get you down from Boston.
Well,
often.
you know, and it's always, especially on a beautiful day like this, to make it out of Boston. But the grandparent scam has been around for a number of years, but they've gotten very sophisticated, and they've been able to utilize social media to obtain the information to make that scam effective. So what they'll do is they'll go on social media and they'll determine that you have children. They may be studying abroad. their names, there's pictures and postings with their names on it. So they learn that, Terry, you have a son who's studying over in Great Britain, in London. And so they will contact you in the dead of night, and they'll either pose as a authority, or they'll get a young individual to pose as your son. And middle of the night, you're getting contacted, and they'll say, you know, we've detained your son on criminal charges. He's going to be transferred to a facility unless he posts $5,000 bail. What you need is to transfer money to this location, to this account, and it will enable him to post the bail.
Sure.
You know, you're caught off guard. Your biggest concern is for your son or daughter. So you get up. Very next morning, you'll go to an entity. You'll try to make that transfer, and many times they'll be successful. Now, our Division of Banks has worked closely with these entities to educate them as to how to spot these scams. And so recently, a member of my office, his mother-in-law, who lives in Texas, whose grandson was studying in Atlanta, received this call in the dead of night.
Same thing.
Same thing, basically saying your grandson's being detained. You need to send $2,000 to this location. So she next morning went to a very legitimate company, and the salesperson said, "I'd like to take your money, ma'am, but you're being scammed." So she promptly left there, went over to a less reputable one, and they took her money, and lo and behold, she had been scammed. Then she contacted the member of my staff, and he's like, "There's nothing we can do. You're out that $2,000. So that's been a very effective. Ransomware.
Yeah, that's another thing that
Yeah.
I'm very interested in.
So what they'll do is they'll put a virus on, you know, this malware on a site. You'll go in there, and all of a sudden, now they have access to your system, and they'll freeze it. And they will then contact you and say, in order to get access to your family photos, all your documents, you need to send this ransom, 500, 5,000, 10,000 to this location. You need to do it within 48 hours, or we're going to delete everything. Not only are consumers impacted by this, but law enforcement agencies. I have a colleague of mine in central Massachusetts who's the chief of police, whose agency or department has been a victim of ransomware on 3 separate occasions. And he's had experts come in, and they'll say, listen, we can undo it and get your police report back and all these essential documents. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars, or you can pay the ransomware. And in some cases, they've just paid it. It's cheaper. We've had hospitals who've been the victim of this, government agencies, private businesses, private individuals. We learned recently that there was a grandmother who was contacted around Christmas time and told that her system had been frozen, and she learned that by going on there. And they said, you need to send $500 to this location within 48 hours, or we're going to delete all your photos. So she's an elderly woman. She spends 2 days coming up with the money. She's just short of $500. So she reaches out to them and says, listen, can you give me another 24 hours? Believe it or not, they had a little bit of a heart. They said, oh, we'll give you 24 hours.
Unbelievable.
And she came up with 500. They unfroze her information. But that's a huge issue out there. So we advise consumers, you know, be vigilant in terms of what sites you're going on. Change your password often, and change it to a password that can't be easily associated with you. That way, you know, your information is protected to a certain degree. Recently, my brother, who lives over in Europe, contacted me to say, you know what, your system's been hacked. You need to change your password. So I went on and I picked 2 names and numbers that couldn't be associated with me. It's about this long.
Right.
And recently, my son and I were running a half marathon in out of state. Just before the gun went off, I said, I can't access my iTunes. And he said, give me your phone, what's your password? By the time he punched it in, the gun had gone off and all these,
boy.
but no one's going to be hacking into my system.
Well, with password protected information, I mean, they say that, well, you need to have a 16-digit password, and you need to change it.
Uppercase, lowercase.
Yeah, and you need to change it, you know, every other month.
Right.
I mean,
I know.
many of us who even deal with computers
Yep.
every day,
Yep.
I can't remember the password that I put in.
It becomes exhausting.
It does.
And there are limits to that. I mean, now in corporate America or government, every so often you'll be notified, IT, you need to change your password or it locks your system. You
Now,
know?
what about the password protection things that are using either fingerprint
Yeah.
recognition or
Yeah.
facial recognition? Are those going to be better?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's another roadblock between you and the scammer out there. So what, you know, even though it may not be perfect, because eventually they'll find a way to circumvent it, it's one more step you can take to protect your information out there. The other thing I'll mention briefly is the corporate scams. What they'll do is they will learn the CEO or the CFO of a corporation or a financial institution, and they will send an email to a low-level person saying you need, in one of their departments, you need to transfer money to this account. Well, it's coming from the CEO or CFO. Who am I to question that, right? And they will have situations where hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars are transferred. Now they're teaching their employees that, hey, even if you get a, you know, you need to verify.
That's happened to us here.
Oh, absolutely.
And on a small number. I mean, we only have a dozen employees, and they received that email that said, hey, you've got to buy, would you buy 10 iTunes cards for $100 or something, and I'll pay you back when I get there.
Right.
Well, it just sounded so weird that they go,
that they do
we
that.
knew you'd never send that.
Right,
so.
right. Well, it's, I mean, some of these scams, you know, you'll get contacted by someone. In fact, I recently got contacted by this individual who said, sir, you know, we've gone on the web and learned that you're a man with considerable knowledge in business. We are looking to invest in the United States. Would you contact us? And basically, they're looking for money.
Yeah.
And so I basically responded. I said, you know, thank you for your interest. I said, I've sent it over to my colleagues at the Attorney General's office.
They'll be checking with you.
Exactly. So, but you know what? Unfortunately, a lot of folks that they prey on are the elderly.
No question about it.
And you know, as a result of which, we just had a conference, elder abuse conference, dealing with financial improprieties, and we had the Middlesex District Attorney, the Undersecretary there, the Commissioner of the Banks, and talking about ways in which elderly can, steps that they can take to protect their information and their assets out there.
Well,
so.
with more of the elderly going on Facebook and using social media, they're more and more exposed, and they have less and less ability to discern when something is a fake. One thing I want to go back to, you mentioned about ransomware. Is ransomware being paid with real dollars, or is it being paid with Bitcoin?
Bitcoin. I recently learned they would gift cards. Using gift cards, they do that especially with the grandparent scam.
Yeah.
You know, send $400 or $500 gift cards to this location. But Bitcoin is the primary way that they make the because it can't be tracked as easily, you know. So, and again, it's just when we have identified an issue, we've taken steps to alert the public.
Right.
You know, they find another way.
How are you guys going to fight this? There's a few of you.
Yeah.
And a load of them.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we work very closely with our sisters agencies out there. We work very closely with the federal government and our counterpart on the federal side. So, you know, there's strength in numbers. We're educating. You know, I mentioned we did these cybersecurity conferences twice, and one dealing with small business and one dealing with financial institutions. And, you know, again, education is one of the biggest tools that businesses and consumers have to protect themselves from being a victim of cybersecurity, identity theft.
So the consumer sitting at home, sitting in this chair, the way we can protect ourselves is just be vigilant?
Be vigilant, and we like to say if it's too good to be true, it probably is,
That's
right?
for sure.
You know, the fake lottery scam, that's been around for years, but I learned not too long ago reading a Boston Globe article that there was a group of individuals had been fleeced of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Basically, listen, you've won a lottery. What you need to do is you need to just pay the taxes and we'll send you a, you know, a lump sum.
Right.
You know, and believe it or not, there are people out there thinking, okay, you know, Christmas came early this year.
I knew somebody that sent the thing to the Nigerian
Yeah.
prince
Yeah.
deal, and I'm thinking, I thought that was the
Right, right.
dumbest
Yeah.
thing known to man.
Right.
You fell for it?
And they do. I mean, we recently learned of the One Ring scam. What they'll do is they'll get your phone number, your cell phone number, and they'll call you. And before you can pick it up, that's the One Ring, they'll terminate the call. If you're like anyone out there, you see a missed call, you don't recognize it, you call back, right? Well, it's a group operating out of the Caribbean, and don't tell me how the specifics of it, but the longer they keep you, when you call back, longer you run up a huge bill. And I learned about it because one of the attorneys in my office happened to be walking by my office, and I said, that was strange. I got this call. They hung up, and I called back, and they would keep me on the line. And he said, oh, no, that's the One Ring scam. I hope you, he said, contact your local carrier, and I did, and they took care of the charges. But again, they're always one step ahead of the game. And the IRS scam, which has been around for years, that is, especially during tax time, and that now they have a twist to it. What they'll do is they'll be calling individuals who might have immigration issues, and they'll, instead of saying that there's a warrant out for you, or we will get a warrant or criminally prosecute you unless you send money for back taxes, they'll say you're going to be deported. So, you know, they just find a way. They find that where you're vulnerable, and then they take advantage of it.
I think that's
Yep.
incredibly
Yeah,
incredibly sleazy, but it's a situation where there is just everybody is out to try to make a buck
right,
off
right.
of some illegal
Yeah,
way.
yeah. And
I don't see how your office can deal with
well,
all
you know
those
what?
complaints.
As I mentioned before, we maintain a toll-free hotline. We have 4 students from Northeastern that spend 6 months with us. So this group started in December, and they're finishing up beginning of July, and then we'll have a new group. And they take about 200 calls a day from consumers who have a variety of issues. And so what we'll do is if we can't respond to the question, we'll refer to one of our agencies. And we have individuals on staff dealing with consumer issues within our 5 agencies. So we're out there, and we're also working with sister agencies. Governor Baker liked to talk about taking down the silos. You know, you're calling this one, oh, we don't deal with that. End of call.
Right.
No, we don't deal with that, but you can contact this agency, and here's the contact information. Here's the individual you want to speak to. They can address that issue.
That'd be
Yeah,
that's awesome.
and so,
right there.
you know, again, there's strength in numbers. So we have people on the local, municipal, state, and federal level all working together to combat identity theft, cybersecurity, and, you know, it's still rampant out there, but we're hard at work protecting consumers, educating consumers, and giving them the tools to deal with the breaches once they occur.
Greg, I thank you so much for coming down. We are way over our time, but
Sure.
it's such great information. We have to get that information out to
Absolutely.
the people at home. So if you're watching and you have a problem, or you feel you've been scammed, or anything that we've talked about that would make sense to call the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, please call that number on the screen. and we will do it. Greg, again, thank you so
Terry,
much.
thank you
we
for
hope
having
that
me.
maybe we could get you down like every 6 months or
yeah,
something to do
absolutely.
this, because these things change.
Exactly.
And you know, some stay the same, but there's some changes. And thank you again very much. And thank you for watching at home. Stay with us, and we'll see you on the next profile. Take care.
Thanks for having me, Terry.